So let's stop and pretend for a minute that everything you heard on the internet about your career and your time on social media, YouTube, Substack, Medium, let's pretend that all the advice you were given was wrong. And let's start from there. So, what if all of the YouTube advice, and I'm not saying that it's all bad because, like most of us, I turn to YouTube myself for from time to time for advice, and that's just the natural way that we do things nowadays. Because we're looking for advice from people who are willing to tell us that we're doing something wrong, we need to change this, we need to fix this. But what if we're really doing something right and they're not telling us? So I tried an experiment here a few months ago, and I began dabbling with this idea of starting a podcast. And when I wanted to start this podcast, I started looking for guests for this podcast. And I quickly found out that most of the people on this platform, Matchmaker.fm or whatever it was, were just people who were participating in this pay-to-play marketplace. As a journalist, I find that incredibly unethical. If you're a marketer, you might think that it's perfectly okay. There's not many ethics left in marketing, as you can tell. That's like finding ethics in a tech company. And I'm just being real when I say that. But what I learned was these people that I was interviewing, they could have wonderful presentations about their product, their skill, or their service. But if you drag them off of topic a little bit, they couldn't handle the conversation. Very few of them. Because they were geared to the mindset for self-promotion. And that's not always a good thing. You see, this pay-to-play mindset for these podcasts, okay, it doesn't work for everyone, okay? So let's just take somebody like Joe Rogan or Lex Friedman or something like this, right? Right off the top. You don't pay to be on that show. You don't. Generally, they select their talent, who they're going to have on the show, because that talent has something to offer beyond just self-promotion. Now, certainly self-promotion is a part of this. That's why they want to be on the Joe Rogan podcast or the Lex Friedman podcast or whatever it is. But the producers and the hosts themselves want to offer you something that's a little bit better than just, here's my product, here's why you should use it, this is why I'm an expert. The truth is, nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to hear why. But how are people getting booked on these podcasts, on these YouTube channels? The answer is pretty simple. They're going back to the old school public relations firms, okay? And these are very talented people who have honed their skills, a lot of them, in the real world applications of having a conversation. If you can't have a conversation, I'm not sure that you can do much else in the public scape, because you're required to have conversations with people. That's part of personalities. Perhaps you're a very agreeable person. Perhaps you're a very, extroverted person. You're willing to have these conversations outside of what it is that you have to offer. That's where things begin to change. If you come into this with just the idea that I have a product or a service or something like that to sell, and you're not developing a deeper relationship with people, then you're going to fail. You're doomed for failure from the get-go. And that's going to make it more difficult for you to ultimately build credibility within your brand. So what I suggest is, if you can afford it, work with a legitimate public relations firm. When I was on this matchmaking site looking for these guests, what I ended up running against was a bunch of very ChatGPT driven PR kits, one sheets, pitches, and stuff like that from people who obviously weren't even putting in the prompts right and the correct English thought process to get a response from ChatGPT that sounded somewhat legitimate. These people are amateur communicators, amateur public relations people. But the people who are getting booked on the top name podcast aren't using those people, and you shouldn't either. It doesn't just go into podcasting, okay? It goes beyond that. It goes, if you want to have a conversation about a product or about a service or something that you're offering, take a look. Recently, I watched the Joe Rogan podcast with Bono of U2. Coincidentally, it was released right before Bono's Stories of Surrender came out on Apple TV. Of course, this was a 3-hour conversation that led to promoting this thing on Apple TV, this movie, if you will. But the entire 3-hour conversation was not about, watch my movie, here's why you should watch my movie, this is what we did to make this movie, this is what we did, this is how we did it, this is why I put this in there. It was a conversation much deeper than that went in about his life, the music, the experiences. 3 hours, Joe Rogan and Bono had this conversation that really keeps you engaged in what's going on. Now, to get my attention for 3 hours is quite difficult. There's no doubt it is. For most of us, it is. But that's how two grown intellectuals, one of them with something to sell for sure, keeps you engaged for 3 hours. And he regularly does this with people. You have to be able to carry yourself in more than just a sales pitch. Look, I think the platforms out there like Apple and Spotify and all these other platforms are just doomed because there's roughly 40 million podcasts in the world or something like that right now. Very few of them are a success. What most people don't tell you is that the very good ones probably get about 300 to 400 downloads a month. That's not that many. Okay? The rest of us are doing pretty good if you get like 20 or 30 downloads a month. That's a reality check. But the people who have something to sell you aren't going to tell you that because they simply want you to buy something. This whole thing about becoming a success is much deeper than just trying to sell a product and being sold a product. It's about being able to connect with an audience. Develop your pathos, ethos, and logos. And I'm not trying to sit here and make it sound like I'm a know-it-all, because I'm not. None of us are. And there's plenty of those people on the internet right now out there trying to sell you something. And I think there's good people on the internet like Kevin Colby, who's trying to give you good information as best he can. And I rely on him a lot, especially when I first started my YouTube channel. I think some of these people are giving you good advice, but there's a lot of bad advice out there too. And sometimes you just need to trust the professionals. Trust the people who know what they're doing. And that sometimes can come at a cost. And that's when you just need to sit back and say, look, I'm going to invest this cost. This is a business, or I'm going to do it for fun. That's how it all comes down to play. So, obviously I'm like anyone else. I want you to subscribe to my channel, follow my newsletter, all these different things. But what I don't want you to do is walk away feeling like you've been sold. I don't want it to be a waste of time. Because nobody likes to have their time wasted. Time is valuable. Time is precious. And I think that we should respect each other's time and learn to have a conversation.